Welcome to the February 22nd, 2022 regular meeting of the City of Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. State law establishes planning commissions. The Planning Commission is comprised of 9 residents appointed to serve our community. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by City Council. Other individuals participating in the meeting include representatives of the City Planning Department, the City Attorney's Office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman Associates. If you wish to address the Planning Commission, please come forward to the lectern when recognized and clearly print your name and address on the sign-in sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission, not to anyone else in the room. If you have a cell phone or any other device that might disrupt the meeting, please either switch it to silent or turn it off. At this time, I'll ask the Planning Commission Recording Secretary, Kathy Zarnecki, to conduct the roll call.
Mr. Faison.
Here.
Mr. Hudson.
Here.
Mr. Krent.
Here.
Mr. Lambert.
Here.
Ms. Malala-Holly.
Here.
Ms. Parakis. Mr. Rumman.
Here.
Mr. Tagle. Here. Quorum present, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Krent moves it. Is there a second? Mr. Faison seconds it. Ready for the roll call?
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Malala-Holly.
Yes.
Mr. Rumman.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is the approval of the minutes from the February 8th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as recorded and presented? Mr. Rahman moves it. Is there a second? Ms. Malala-Holly seconds it. We're ready for the roll call.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Malala-Holly.
Yes.
Mr. Rumman.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is public comment for items not on the agenda tonight. Is there anyone who would like to speak on an item not on the agenda? Seeing none, then we will move on to a public hearing, special use and preliminary site plan approval, file number SPJPLN 2021-0027, a proposed 780 West Maple North Industrial Building, east side of Barrett, north of Maple, PIN 88-20-3004-029, Section 28, currently zoned MR Maple Road District. And Mr. Carlisle, are you doing the presentation?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, Planning Commission. The site in question tonight is a approximately 0.64 acre site. It's currently 2 parcels that are vacant at this point. The parcels are located just north of Maple on Barrett Street. The site itself is surrounded by a number of light industrial, office, and commercial uses, and the site is zoned Maple Road Form-Based District. The site plan in front of you that the applicant is asking special use approval for is to build a 1-story, 7,400 square foot light industrial / office type building. The building then will be divided into 4 speculative tenant sites. We don't know what the final tenant users are, but it's going to be a mix of office in the front and light industrial warehousing uses in the back. We do note that there are a lot of common uses of those in the general area that have office uses in front that are supported by those light industrial uses in the back. Light industrial uses do require a special use. So looking at the site plan in front of you, the big blue box is the building itself that fronts up on Barrett Street. Access is just south off of Barrett Street with a cross access to the south to the property adjacent to it. We note that the building, as required, is placed 10 feet from Barrett Drive, with the drive aisle just south of the building. Parking is located at the side and the rear of the building, and loading and access to the light industrial portions of the building are located in the rear of the building themselves. We do note that from all the bulk standards, height, setback, etc., it does comply with all the MR Maple Road requirements. Based on the mixture of uses, the applicant was required to provide 20 spaces, 5 spaces for each suite. So this is a total of 20 spaces. We do note the applicant is only providing 19 parking spaces. The actual number when you did the breakdown was 19.33. We round up to be up to that full 20. So by ordinance, they're short by 0.3 a space, but we round it up to they're actually short by 1 space. And we do note that the applicant is not required the required bicycle parking as required in the ordinance. One issue for discussion is the location of the loading spaces. You'll note that the 2 loading spaces are in those purple boxes that are right behind the building itself. It raises 2 issues of question for us. The first is access to those spaces. How do they get to those? How do trucks back into those 2 spaces that seem very tight? And then secondly, there are some rear doors you'll see in one of the next slides that show access to those back portions of the building. With the trucks located in this location, they would clearly block any access to those rear doors. And so we have a question about how that would function. As noted, there will be a full access to the site via Barrett Drive, and we do also note that the applicant is providing a cross access to the property to the south. The property to the south is also owned by the same owner as this proposed site itself. We do note that to put in the cross access, it would require the removal of 3 parking spaces on that southern site itself, and so we are asking the applicant to confirm the parking on the southern site to ensure it meets zoning ordinance requirements, as well as provide us with a cross-access easement agreement. Even though they're owned by the same ownership, if one parcel were to sell, we want that cross-access in place so that it would remain in perpetuity regardless of who owns the 2 sites. The applicant has given us a landscape plan. It does comply with all the ordinance requirements with regards to the number of trees. We do note that by ordinance requirement, the applicant is to provide 6 street trees along Barrett. They note that there is location of a number of overhead power lines, and so it makes it impossible to plant those trees in front of the building on Barrett, so they are putting them on the northern side of the building. So the actual number itself they do comply with, but the location they're asking for relief from the Planning Commission. This is a relief the Planning Commission has given in the past with regards to landscaping when utility lines, are obstructing the opportunity to plant in their specific location. The applicant has provided a photometric plan. They're proposing 4 sconce lights that are located on the side and the back of the building. The fixture itself, as well as the photometrics, do comply with all the lighting requirements. The applicant has given elevations and rendering. We note that the primary materials of the building on the front and side are going to be brick, metal panels, composite wood, and glass. And you'll see in my next slide I have an elevation for the rear, and that's primarily CMU and overhead metal doors. This elevation shows what would front on Barrett and the side of the access drive. It does appear to meet the transparency requirement as required by Maple Road. We just do ask that they confirm that calculation as part of the requirements.
Can I jump in real quick? Yeah, these were not in the packet, but they were emailed to all the Planning Commission today.
One point of discussion is that you'll see in this elevation is, this is the rear elevation, again, primarily CMU in these overhead doors. Because this fronts the rear of the building backs onto a parking lot, by ordinance they're required to provide 30% transparency on this elevation. Of that 30%, 80% can be what we consider an alternative. So the actual amount of glazing on the back is not as significant as it would be on the front and side. But by ordinance, they don't meet that requirement, and so they will be required to put some transparency on that back side of the building. There are 7 special use standards that the Planning Commission should consider when we're reviewing the application. They're outlined in Section 903. With regards to special use itself, we do find they have met those standards. The proposed use as office light industrial is consistent with the surrounding land uses in this area. The architecture material details are of a much higher quality than the surrounding properties in the area. The use is compatible with the master plan, which does call for a variety of uses, especially in the Maple Road district. The applicant is repurposing a vacant site. And lastly, the proposed use would not require any additional public services than that required for another use. So with that, we are recommending approval, but we do have some points of deliberation for the Planning Commission. The first is the location of the proposed loading spaces. 2 is the 1-space parking deviation requested by the applicant. 3 is consideration of the alternative location of the street trees. And 4th is to confirm parking for the southern building. If the Planning Commission does grant special use and preliminary site plan approval, we recommend the conditions that they provide 2 bicycle spaces, the cross-access easement, transparency calculations, and transparency along the rear elevations. But overall, we do support the special use as well as the site plan here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Any questions from the commission for Mr. Carlisle?
Got a quick one.
Mr. Krent?
Help us out with the acronym CM, what was that?
CMU,
Yes.
cinder masonry unit, concrete masonry unit.
Okay,
Thank
and
you.
that
It's a
means cinder block?
cinder block, essentially.
Okay, just to help me and the audience understand what's happening. Thank
I'll
you.
let the actual architect go into more detail about that.
Yes, Mr. Faison.
I was just wondering if staff had a conversation with the applicant about the location of the proposed loading spaces.
We have not had direct discussions with them. This is a second review. We've looked at this project. I think it came up in our first review, and it's obviously come up in this one. So they've seen our comments on that. They're here tonight to address those comments as well. But I have not had a direct conversation with the location of those loading spaces.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Mahala.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Carlisle, is it pretty common for us to grant easement access between an existing structure and a structure that is to be built? Is it common for us?
It's very common. In fact, you have the authority to require cross-access when deemed necessary.
So that will require 3 parking spaces, as you observed in your presentation, which means, are we going to fall short of parking spaces for the existing building?
That was my question I was asking. It's owned by the same owners. They've agreed to do a cross-access. They have noted that the 3 spaces that they would have to remove would not hinder operations at that current site, at the southern site below. But we are asking for confirmation that it does meet the zoning ordinance parking requirements.
So currently, as the building stands, the parking meets the requirement for the existing building and its use. And if we remove 3 parking spaces to provide cross easement access, we are still going to be okay with the parking requirements for the existing building and its use?
That's the question I'm asking. They need to confirm that.
Okay.
But right now, the southern building meets parking requirements by ordinance. So we're asking, by removing the 3, do they still comply with the zoning ordinance with regards to parking? But yes, the Planning Commission, it's very common for the Planning Commission to put in cross-access as well as require cross-access.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Carlisle? Mr. Krent?
A little question regarding the trees. Further down the street or north on Bartlett Drive, there are trees in front of the buildings, and they're not, the one to the south that doesn't have it because it's so close to the curb. Why, what's the setback requirements, and why can't we move that building back further? Obviously it may affect their parking, but I'm just wondering why other sites just north of this building have trees in front. And
My assumption is, Mr. Krenn, is those buildings are placed well back behind the 10-foot. So on in the Maple Road District, you have 10-foot build-to requirement. So you have to put the building at 10 feet from the right-of-way.
okay, and they're not in that?
They are in that.
Yeah,
The buildings
the ones
north of
north.
they're not in that. They're in a different they're in the industrial zone district, I believe, which has a much larger setback than what this district requires.
Good.
And so if the Planning Commission were to require them to move the building back, they may be able to put in street trees, but it would also greatly affect the actual layout of the site plan. So they are meeting the intent of the ordinance to have the building at the street, but in order to do so, because of the overhead wires, they are seeking relief from the location of those trees, not the number of the trees.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Mr. Carlisle? Seeing none, we'll call the petitioner. Go ahead and sign in and introduce yourself and give us an overview of the project.
Buonasera. My name is Ben Tissio, Tissio Architects, 19815 Farmington Road, Livonia, Michigan. Thank you for hearing us tonight. As a matter of fact, if I may, I'll answer the parking question first. Who do I?
You can start here. Everyone gets one?
Everybody, yeah, there's 10 copies.
Thank you.
How you distribute that. This is in regards to answering the question about the parking on the south parcel. The south parcel has 18,195 square feet, and it's split up between industrial and office use. Doing the count of 1/3 for the industrial use, 2/3 office use, which is a higher parking ratio. The breakdown indicates that there are 52 parking spaces required. In counting the actual spaces with the removal of the tree, we have 67 spaces on the site, so we would be 15 over the required parking for the south parcel. So we far exceed the requirements for the south building. So that's not affected. That's probably why in the original conversation, we were asked to see if we could have a cross-access easement for the two parcels. So if they had to share some parking, they could do that. And given it's the same owner. So that was part of the reasoning for providing that cross-access easement. And as indicated before, this is all owned by the same owner. I sent some documents over earlier, late yesterday and today. I'm not sure if it got to anyone regarding the parking computations. Did you
The transparency computations?
both the transparency, yes, and the actual parking computations?
Yeah, they're not in the packet for the Plan Commission. The packet went out Friday.
Oh, okay.
If you could present, that would be great.
Pardon?
If you could present, that would be great.
Okay, I only brought one copy. My apologies, I didn't know that you would not have them. I went through the parking computations, and I just differ from the methodology that was used by the planner with 20. Usually when you do a speculative office building or speculative building, you take a ratio of the total gross square footage of either uses, and then you go through the parking count. The reasoning of coming up with the 20 spaces is because the roundup factor was used on each of the 4 tenants. In my computations, I mean, we may get 3 tenants. We may get 2 tenants, we may get 1 tenant. Under 3 tenants, we would only require 19. Under 2 tenants, we would require only 18 parking spots. If we had 1 tenant, it would be 19. That's how I arrived at the 19. And the same would be true if you were doing a 100,000 square foot office building that was spec, is that you don't usually take each individual tenant space and do the parking multiplications for that. You use the gross square footages and you work off of the gross for the building. That's why we have the differ. So I just disagree with the methodology. If you accept the methodology, then we ask if we could get a variance for the 1 parking spot, because we may not need it. We may get 2 tenants, and then we only need 18, we're 1 over. We discussed the tree location issues. The building has a maximum setback of 10 feet, so we can't take it back any further. So we would like to have had the trees in the front, but we just couldn't fit them in. The transparency, I did forward those transparency computations.
Yes.
Going back to the parking,
Yes.
given the fact that the properties are owned by the same owner, and given also the fact that there's, in all likelihood, going to be cross-access, a shared parking agreement would take care of the parking situation, given
That's
that,
easy enough to do.
given that there's an access on the south.
Correct.
Even if it's shared parking over the entire site or just along the north, it takes care of the parking problem. Easy peasy.
And I'm sure the owner's willing to do it. As a matter of fact, that's how the initial design started, with that idea of combining the 2 parcels and having the shared access and the shared parking. And then we were asked to separate it. So that's an easy fix. Thank you. The transparency, I did send out the computations for that. Was that distributed or not? Or
Was not distributed.
Okay.
My apologies.
I did provide the actual drawings with the computations on there. And if I go through my computation sheets, my apologies, I didn't bring everything for copy, but I do have my own set here. By example, the front computations require, excuse me, 321 square feet of transparency area. We have 432. So that's 67% versus 50% that's required. The south and the north side are identical. They're just opposite hand. We're required, required 127 square feet. We have 120. So we were short on that one by a percent and a half. The rear, we did not show it on there, and that's my apologies, my miss, my bad. I didn't realize there was a transparency requirement on the back as well. And that's easy enough. If you look at the overhead doors, we can simply add, of course it dies on me, add some light panels on the panels of the doors. And that would be within the 2 to the 8 foot or the 6 foot area that's required for the transparency. So that's an easy fix.
So just so we're on the same page, so if you look between, so the transparency measurement is between 2 and 8 feet.
Right.
So if what Mr. Tissio is saying is if he could calculate what's needed, but he could replace maybe 2 panels per door with glass across the board, and that gets us at 30%.
Correct.
Maybe I'm asking the same question. So you said that the transparency has to be at the man height level or something like that, right?
Between 2 and 8 feet.
Between 2 and 8 feet. Okay. All right. So
Each of the panels that you see, the horizontal, they're 2 feet high. So it'd be the 4th panel would be the higher one. So we would step down to the 6 and the 4 foot area. So that would be at eye level so that so you could see through it.
Got it.
To accommodate.
It also brings in some natural light, which is.
And it brings the natural. As a matter of fact, we're doing more and more ideas with skylights, but I'm getting a lot of pushback with owners on skylights because they tend to leak. They tend to be more problematic, losing heat. And so what we're doing more and more in industrial buildings is adding high window bays to allow the light to come in. And that was one of the things that we were also considering doing here. But then it doesn't meet transparency requirement because of the fact that it's too high.
Are these doors right here?
Those are doors, and they're painted the same color as the CMU.
Because if you couldn't get the 30 through the panels, you could go glass doors and have the same effect.
We could, but I don't think from a security reason the owners would want to put in glass doors there. But in either case, we would comply by adding that to the glass doors in the sense that we would then have 40% of the area for transparency. I know there's a comment about some bicycle spaces. We can easily accommodate that between the sidewalk and the property line. I think we have about 4 feet or so. So that's an easy fix on that one. The one thing about the loading spaces, since your ordinance requires a 10 by 50 loading space, it's not designed to accommodate a tractor trailer, which would be a total of 75 feet, that has a 5th wheel with a 53-foot trailer. I know that because I used to drive one. So the deliveries will be mainly in panel trucks, or you might see them as these Amazons. It's easy enough to pull in, go into that access drive, and then back up into those spaces, and then just pull right out. We're not looking to get a tractor trailer designed to accommodate this site, simply because it's a 10 by 50 requirement. So we don't see any issues with that accessibility. Yes, they might be in front of a door for a few minutes that it takes to make a delivery, and then they'll be out. Let's see. I believe I covered all the questions, if I'm not mistaken.
Great.
I welcome any questions from you. And by the way, with me is the civil engineer as well and the owner's representative. So
Great, thank you. Mr. Rahman, I know you had a question. So.
well, yeah, I was wondering, what will be the use,
it's an office and industrial. My client has determined that there's a larger need, especially you can see the built up along Maple there, that for industrial and office and smaller uses, not the larger uses. He seems to think that there's a good market for that. And that's what's promoting him to develop this vacant parcel.
Any questions? Yes, Mr. Hudson.
You're speculating on your tenants in this building.
Yes.
And indicating that any deliveries may be by a smaller truck than a semi. How can you say that with not knowing who your tenant's going to be and what uses and supplies they're going to need?
Well, on a smaller building like this, it'd be highly unlikely that you would get, one, a tractor trailer making a delivery at this site. And two, the fact that your ordinance requires a 10 by 50 loading unloading space. It can't accommodate a semi-truck.
Well, I understand that. My question is, how do you know there won't be a semi in there making a delivery if you don't know what the tenants are going to need or require for their business?
Again, because of the size of the tenant spaces, it's extremely unlikely that you would have a semi making those kinds of bulk deliveries to these small areas.
We're going in circles in our question and
Yes,
answer.
I'd right.
You're telling me you don't know,
I don't know that, but it's highly
but you would guess.
That's my guess, is that you would not have that.
Mr. Faison, I think you had a question.
I had a follow-up to Mr. Rahman's question. I had the same question. I'm not sure if you can answer it.
Yeah.
I was just curious, as an example, could you give an example of someone who would lease one of those suites where it's like...
Could be a contractor, has an office,
There's an office in the front.
there in the back. It could be any kind of other, not manufacturing, but a landscaper. I mean, somebody that would need a shop area to bring in materials, work on it, and then deliver it. They're just smaller. I know the building up front has the same kind of uses.
So in that scenario, it's like not manufacturing, it's just like...
It's not manufacturing.
Storage, maybe some light...
Some storage, right. There may be some storage. Actually, one of the things that the owner asked is, can we make the building as high as reasonable? Because we believe that there's going to be a lot of higher storage requirements.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes, Mr. Krent.
CMU besides Central Michigan University is?
Concrete masonry unit.
Okay, so what are we going to use?
I'm sorry?
What type of concrete masonry?
Well, there's only one concrete masonry unit. It's the old block or cinder block. They stopped making cinder blocks when they stopped using cinder, which is a byproduct of burning coal. I used to teach the class, so Mr. Tagle knows about it too. Not that he was at the time when they used to use it, but nor was I. But that's where the cinder block, and people still recall it as cinder block. The proper name is concrete masonry unit, or CMU. And it's just a standard CMU. You paint it. It's in different widths, same height, all 8 inches coursing.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the members of the commission? Seeing none, I think we're done. We'll open a public
Thank you.
hearing.
So you mind, let me finish.
Oh,
that
go
here.
right ahead, finish filling that in.
Go ahead.
I'm going to open the public hearing. If there's anyone here who wishes to speak to the commission on this, would come forward at this time. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission either for a resolution or for questions for staff. Yes, Mr. Krent.
Well, the only little flaw in this whole plan to me is the lack of 1.5%, as he said, of the transparencies on the north and south side. 1.5%, I'm not going to make a fuss over that. I'll just say fine.
Okay, all right. Anyone else? Anyone want to take a shot at making a resolution?
I'll take it.
Oh, go ahead.
I
Mr.
think
Rahman?
we're not adding anything the way it is, so it's just...
I think that the only thing that we need to make sure that's added on there is the shared parking agreement. Is that correct? Should that be part of the resolution, Mr. Savanant? Okay. And cross.
Cross access and shared parking. Okay, when I get there. Okay. Resolved, the Planning Commission hereby approves a reduction in the total number of required parking spaces for the proposed 780 West Maple North Industrial Building to 19, when a total of 20 spaces are required on the site based on the off-street parking space requirements for industrial and office. this one space reduction is sufficient to meet parking demands based on shared ownership with the property to the south, and resolved, the Planning Commission hereby waives the loading space requirement, and resolved that special use approval and preliminary site plan approval for the proposed 780 West Maple North Industrial Building, east side of Barrett, north of Maple, Section 28, currently zoned MR, Maple Road District, be granted, subject to the following conditions. Number 1, provide bicycle rack for 2 bicycles, provide cross-access easement, provide transparency calculations. I think it's already provided, right? So we don't need to really, we don't need that. Provide transparency along the rear elevation, that's also not needed. So first 2 items I think we need, and then what we are adding is
We need the cross-access agreement.
Shared parking.
so we provide cross-access agreement and then a shared parking agreement.
And then we also need to make sure we provide transparency along the rear elevation, is that correct?
Through the addition of replacing 2 panels per door with transparent glass.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Is there, yes, Mr. Savinant?
And they, one of the statements was the eliminating the loading, unloading, and they haven't done that. They're keeping the loading and unloading.
Okay.
And sorry. So we try to craft a resolution. It's a proposed resolution. It doesn't, it's a starting point. So not knowing that we're going to go down the path of shared parking, there was language in there to provide an administrative reduction. We can keep it in there because technically you're allowing the administrative reduction on the property, but we're doing it because of the shared parking. And the shared parking is a condition, so we're good there.
Okay.
What
Good.
about the trees? The trees?
The trees, allowing the different location of the trees.
So that's not included here, right?
We added that in there so that we allow them to have the trees on the north side rather than on the street side, so. Any,
We don't have to mention the loading space change, or?
Mr. Tagle?
We're not waiving the loading space requirements. The issue with the loading space was accessibility, and I think I would propose striking that line because they provided, per the ordinance, the loading space size and number required. So that's what I would suggest, just strike the loading space comment.
Okay.
Okay, so I just changed my proposal. The motion is that we don't use the line, the Planning Commission hereby waives the loading space requirement, so that goes out. Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Zarnicki, do you understand what we crafted here, or do you need us to restate it or not?
I think I understand.
Okay, and plus you have good staff who can make sure that our words make sense when you're writing this all together. So is there a second to the motion? Mr. Tagle seconds it. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we are ready for the roll call.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Malala Holly?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krantz?
Yes.
Motion carries.
You have your approval.
I understood this was a study session. I guess it's a vote session. Thank you very much.
All right, that was the only regularly scheduled business we have on the agenda tonight. Next is other items. Public comments for items on the agenda. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to the commission on items on the only item on the agenda? Seeing none, now we're on to Planning Commission comment. And what I'll start over here tonight and start with Mr. Carlisle if he has any comments.
No comment.
Okay. Mr. Savinant.
One item at the last city council meeting, An item that went before Planning Commission for recommendation, Adler Cove, one-family residential cluster option, was approved. If you recall, it was on the south side of Long Lake, just east of John R., 20 units.
Thank you. Ms. Dufresne?
Were you going to mention the city council has a date?
Yeah, I can do that. So remember the neighborhood node walk and talks we did? City council wants to be involved in the master plan, and I say it's a good problem to have. So they recognize that neighborhood nodes are one of the items we're kind of focusing on for the master plan. So they want to do their own tour of nodes, and we're going to do a bus tour of 3 nodes on a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning on March 12th. The intent is to solicit feedback from City Council and share what Planning Commission and residents had to say, but really it's to kind of pick the brains of the City Council, who ultimately is responsible for adopting the master plan.
Have you picked those notes?
Do you remember which nodes they are?
Not yet.
How are you going to pick them?
Do you want to? There's a microphone right there. So the packets with detailed information will be available about a week prior to the meeting. And then the questions that Julie's whispering to me here will be answered in those packets, including which nodes they're going to visit.
Thank you. I have nothing.
Oh, well, you did have something, but Mr. Tagle?
Nothing tonight.
Mr. Rahman?
The tour that they were going to have, it's going to be other people also, just our city council only?
It's a public, so Julie, feel free to jump in. So it's a public meeting. The public is welcome to attend, like they are at all public meetings. The intent is to solicit input from City Council. We had a well-advertised, well-attended neighborhood node walk and talks with 6 nodes where we strongly encouraged the public to attend because we wanted to hear their input. Again, this is a public meeting. The public is welcome to attend, but the intent is to solicit input from City Council. I don't know how else to say it.
Okay.
I'm not telling people not to show up, but I'm not begging them to show up either.
Right. I mean, the city has done bus tours and under other circumstances. Then the trick is, if you have a lot of people from the public show up, we have to accommodate them on the bus. So again, because I imagine that there will be more than quorum who show up, but City Council who shows up, it needs to be advertised, it needs to be, we meet all the requirements of the Meeting Act. So we'll see. We'll see.
No, thank you.
Mr. Krent?
What's that?
Mr. Faison?
Just a question for you, Brent, on that. So if the bus tour's on the 12th, what's the expectation of the follow-up and connecting with the Planning Commission and the council working on the plan or the node strategy?
So there's 2 steps that we've talked about having specific to the neighborhood nodes following the input from City Council. And I don't know which order, we haven't decided really which order these 2 steps would be in, but one of the goals is to establish a Planning Commission subcommittee to roll up our sleeves, meet here at City Hall, maybe at night, maybe on a Saturday morning, and literally go over the 21 nodes and come up with recommendations for all of the nodes. It would be some involved meetings, but I think we can come up with a plan for these 21 nodes, and also to get together at a joint meeting with City Council, Planning Commission and City Council, to talk about the nodes. Which one of those comes first, we haven't really decided yet. First things first is the node visits with Council, then those 2 steps. And then once we do those 2 steps, we'll hit the ground running with moving forward with the draft plan.
Thanks.
Mr. Hudson?
Nothing.
Ms. Malala Holly?
I just have a follow-up question to the master plan. So the whole project began last year. What are we looking at in terms of when will this whole process be completed and revised, as we are hoping to revise some of the things on the master plan? What is it? 2-year time frame, end of this year? What does it look like?
Realistically, I think we're looking at having a draft that's ready to sink our teeth into, like fall. it's been, we don't officially, we don't have a, we're earmarking March 12th for the city council neighborhood node visits. They haven't approved that yet. We anticipate they're going to on Monday night. But we've been scheduling around holidays, and there's some logistic issues there. Once we get this meeting out of the way and we establish a subcommittee, and we'll be able to set some firm dates with subcommittees and then with the joint meeting, that'll give us a better ability to be predictable.
Got it. Thank you.
Ms. Zarnecki, anything?
No, thank you.
All right. I have nothing to add, so we are adjourned.
Very good.